A stone wall that stood for centuries could vanish in a single afternoon. Medieval engineering did not just change armies, it reshaped continents and redrew the maps of power. By the end of this story, you will understand how the ingenuity of the Middle Ages forged the battlefields of the future. How did a simple lever and counterweight become the most feared weapon of its time? And what happened when the first cannons turned the world upside down? What does it truly mean to build something that can change the world? For a soldier standing outside a castle wall, the world had become impossibly small. His entire universe was reduced to a stretch of damp stone, a patch of muddy ground, and the slow, grinding crawl of time. This was the reality of siege warfare before engineering changed everything. Armies did not smash through walls, they camped outside them for weeks, for months, sometimes for years. The primary strategy was not to break the castle, but to outlast the people inside. It was a war of stomachs and morale, a brutal test of endurance where disease and hunger often claimed more lives than any sword. The high walls were the ultimate advantage, making a relatively small force of defenders nearly invincible. A castle was more than a building, it was a statement of unshakable power, and conquering one was a testament to sheer, stubborn patience. But this very supremacy created a paradox. The very strength of these fortifications made war a stagnant, draining endeavor for everyone involved. The immense cost, both in resources and human hardship, created a vacuum, a silent, desperate plea for a better way. The battlefield was stuck, and it would take a new kind of thinker, someone who saw levers and counterweights as the true keys to power, to finally get it moving again. The very stagnation of the siege created an intellectual hunger for new solutions. This great leap in military technology was not born in a vacuum, but emerged from a vibrant marketplace of ideas spanning continents and centuries. In quiet monastic libraries and bustling trading ports, a quiet revolution was underway. Scholars and engineers pored over ancient texts preserved from Rome and Greece, rediscovering forgotten principles of mechanics and geometry. At the same time, trade routes along the Silk Road and through the Mediterranean acted as information superhighways, bringing advanced mathematical and engineering concepts from the Islamic world and the East. This created an unprecedented fusion of knowledge, a fertile ground where practical craftsmanship met theoretical genius. Consider the surviving sketchbook of a man named Villard de Honnecourt. It is not a record of battles, but a window into a restless, inventive mind. His pages are filled with everything from intricate church architecture to a perpetual motion machine and a detailed drawing of a sawmill operated by water power. He combined the hands-on skill of a stonemason with the abstract logic of geometry, using these tools to solve complex problems of force, weight, and structure. This cross-pollination meant a design for a more efficient crane, conceived in northern France, could be refined by a German engineer using stronger local timber, and then further improved by an Italian mathematician who calculated a more optimal counterweight. It was a slow, collaborative evolution, a synthesis of global knowledge that was steadily building toward a single, powerful application. The stage was now set, not for a lone inventor, but for an entire era of engineers ready to apply this accumulated wisdom to the most pressing problem of their age, the art of war. The quiet collaboration in libraries and workshops found its ultimate expression on the battlefield with the rise of the Trebuchet. This was not merely a larger catapult, it was a new kind of thinking made of wood and iron, a machine that turned the simple principle of the lever into earth-shattering force. Its evolution tells a story of constant refinement. It began with the traction trebuchet, a device reliant on human strength. A team of soldiers would haul down on ropes attached to one end of a pivoting beam, swinging the other end upward to launch a projectile from a sling. It was effective, but its power was limited by the stamina and coordination of its crew. Then came the revolutionary leap, the counterweight trebuchet. Engineers replaced the pulling team with an enormous box filled with stones, a massive weight that could be hoisted into the air. When released, this weight fell with a relentless, consistent force no human team could match. The physics were brutally elegant. A long wooden beam acted as a lever, a carefully positioned axle served as the pivot point, and a leather sling acted as a whip, extending the arm's reach and adding a final, snapping acceleration. This combination could launch a stone weighing 200 pounds in a high, arching trajectory over castle walls from a distance previously thought safe. The impact was not just physical, it was deeply psychological. The groan of the winch, the thunderous crash of the counterweight, and the whistle of an incoming stone created a symphony of dread. These engines were versatile, capable of hurling more than just stone blocks. They could lob containers of flammable pitch to start fires within a fortress, or even project the remains of animals over the walls in an early, grim form of biological warfare, aiming to spread illness and break the defender's spirit. The trebuchet demonstrated that the greatest weapon was not muscle but applied knowledge. It forced a reckoning, proving that no wall was truly safe from a mind that understood the laws of motion. This new standard of power would not go unanswered, however, and the response would come from an even more volatile and unexpected source. The thunder of the trebuchet was not just sound, it was a message. At the siege of Acre, that message was delivered day and night for nearly 2 years. This was not a simple clash of armies, but a grinding industrial contest where the primary laborers were engineers and carpenters. The air itself became a battlefield, thick with the arcs of massive stones launched from opposing lines. On one side, the Crusader forces, on the other, the defenders of the city, each seeking to shatter the other's walls and break their will through a relentless exchange of heavy stone. Chroniclers of the time wrote of a near-constant, deafening cacophony, the roar of the engines followed by the explosive crash of granite against masonry. In this brutal environment, the machines earned names that echoed their terrifying purpose. The Crusaders deployed massive trebuchets christened with titles like the Bad Neighbor and God's Own Stone Thrower. These were not anonymous weapons, they were personalities of war, their very names a blend of dark humor and reverence for the apocalyptic power they wielded. Victory at Acre was not decided in a single, glorious cavalry charge. It was carved out slowly, stone by stone, by the side that could master the complex logistics of siege engineering. This meant felling vast forests for timber, sourcing and shaping immense stone ammunition, and keeping these complex machines operational under constant counterfire. The real heroes of this struggle were the sappers and the engineers, the men who understood leverage and stress better than they understood swordplay. The fall of Acre sent a shockwave across 2 continents, a clear and undeniable lesson. Human courage was still essential, but it was now secondary to a new kind of strength. The age of the fortress had met its match, not in a stronger wall, but in a superior mind. And just as this new reality settled over the battlefields of the world, an even more volatile and unpredictable force was emerging from the workshops of alchemists, one that would harness the power of fire and smoke to make the trebuchet itself seem almost quaint. Gravity itself became the new soldier, a tireless, unimaginably strong recruit. This was the core genius of the counterweight trebuchet. Its power did not come from the straining muscles of 100 men, but from the simple, unyielding pull of the earth. Engineers called the massive stone-filled box the hulling, and its design was a meticulous science. The weight of this box, the length of the throwing arm on either side of the pivot point, and the precise construction of the sling all had to exist in a perfect, calculated harmony. Getting this ratio wrong meant a stone might plop harmlessly into a moat, but getting it right transformed the machine into a true battlefield titan. A well-tuned trebuchet could launch a projectile the weight of a full-grown man over a distance greater than 3 football fields placed end to end. This incredible range meant besieging armies could set up their engines far outside the reach of archers on the walls, turning a previously safe stronghold into a vulnerable target. But power and distance were only part of the story. The true moment of magic, the split second that turned potential energy into devastating velocity, was the release. Engineers devised a brilliant pivoting hook mechanism. As the massive arm swung upward, the sling would whip around, and at the absolute perfect point in the arc, this hook would pivot, letting one end of the sling fly free. This action was not a simple letting go. It was a final, snapping acceleration that added a tremendous burst of speed to the stone. Think of it like a figure skater pulling in their arms to spin faster, that final, concentrated release of energy. This machine was more than a weapon, it was a physical argument. It demonstrated with crushing finality that a deep understanding of leverage and momentum could achieve what an entire army of swordsmen could not. It was the ultimate expression of mechanical advantage, a symbol of a new era where the greatest strength was not found in a soldier's arm, but in an engineer's calculations. A deep, rhythmic pounding became the heartbeat of a siege, a sound that seeped into the minds of everyone trapped inside the walls. This was more than an attack on stone, it was a sustained assault on the human spirit. The psychological terror these engines wielded was often their most devastating weapon. Imagine the relentless, unpredictable nature of it. There was no charge of cavalry to brace for, no line of infantry to repel. Just the endless, groaning machinery in the distance, followed by the sudden, shattering impact somewhere inside your world. You could not fight it. You could only wait, and with each thunderous crash, the very idea of safety crumbled a little more. This bombardment was terrifyingly versatile. While stone blocks shattered parapets and towers, besiegers filled the sky with other, more sinister projectiles. They launched the remains of animals over the walls, a grim tactic intended to spread illness and foul the water supply. In some of the most intense conflicts, they even hurled the heads of captured comrades back into the fortress. These were not random acts of cruelty, but calculated messages of absolute dominance, designed to break the defenders' will to resist by showing them the futility of their situation. Even beehives were sometimes catapulted into crowded courtyards, turning a defensive position into a scene of chaotic, painful distress. The goal was to make life within the walls unbearable, to transform a stronghold from a sanctuary into a prison of fear. Often, the mere construction of these colossal machines was enough to achieve victory. The sight of a trebuchet's massive wooden frame rising from a distant hill was a statement of intent more powerful than any battle cry. It communicated that the besiegers were prepared for a long industrial war, that they possessed the resources, the expertise, and the patience to reduce a castle to rubble. Faced with this undeniable demonstration of engineering might, many garrison commanders chose to open negotiations rather than endure the coming storm. In these instances, the trebuchet won the battle without ever launching a single stone. Its power was not just in the destruction it caused, but in the destruction it promised. This revealed a profound truth about medieval warfare. The greatest siege engine was not the one that broke the wall fastest, but the one that could first break the resolve of the people standing behind it. The thunder of the trebuchet did not just break walls, it reshaped the very philosophy of defense. A new kind of castle began to rise from the rubble, one where survival was valued above all else. The soaring, elegant walls of an earlier era were a liability now, their proud height offering a larger target for incoming stones. Architects responded with a radical shift toward brutish practicality. They designed walls that were lower but immensely thicker, trading grandeur for a dense, layered bulk of earth and stone that could absorb and dissipate the devastating kinetic energy of a 200-pound stone block. This was not an architecture of statement but of stubborn resilience. The transformation extended to the castle's towers. The traditional square keep, with its flat sides and sharp corners, was a death trap. Its walls were vulnerable to direct hits, and its corners created shadowy blind spots where attackers could gather, safe from the defender's view, to mine the foundations or assemble a battering ram. The solution was a stroke of geometric genius. The round tower, its curved surface presented a glancing, deflective face to incoming projectiles, causing stones to skid off at an angle rather than striking head-on. More importantly, it eliminated every blind spot. Defenders on a circular wall could command a full 360-degree field of fire, leaving no place for an attacker to hide. This was a fortress learning to turn away a blow and see in every direction at once. But the ultimate expression of this defensive evolution was the concentric castle. Imagine a castle within a castle, a layered stronghold of multiple independent curtain walls. An attacker who breached the outer wall did not find victory but a deadly trap. They found themselves in a narrow killing zone, a bailey completely exposed to archers on the even higher inner walls. They would then have to regroup and launch a fresh assault, all while under a constant, murderous hail of arrows and stones from all sides. This was a fortress that fought back even after it was breached. Every thickened wall and rounded tower was a direct response to a specific threat, a silent conversation between the builder's trowel and the engineer's blueprint. The race was on, and for a time, the balance of power seemed to tilt back toward the defender. Yet this very success in stone would soon provoke an even more terrifying and unpredictable response from the attackers, one that relied not on gravity, but on the explosive power of chemistry. But a new sound was coming, one that did not rely on the groan of wood or the crash of a counterweight. It was a sharp, concussive crack that announced a different kind of power entirely. While the trebuchet represented the absolute peak of mechanical force, a revolution born of chemistry was slowly traveling the ancient trade routes from the east. This was the arrival of gunpowder. Its first appearances on European battlefields were almost theatrical, designed more for terror than for destruction. Soldiers wielded fire lances, which were essentially tubes packed with the mixture that shot out gouts of flame and sparks. They threw early grenades, ceramic pots filled with the volatile powder, creating sudden, frightening explosions in the midst of a melee. The primary weapon was shock itself, the ability to startle horses and break the nerve of an enemy line with noise and fire. The true transformation began when engineers realized this substance could do more than just flash and roar. It could propel. The earliest cannons, like the one known as the pot de feu or iron pot, were incredibly simple. They were little more than iron vessels shaped like a vase with a narrow mouth at one end. A charge of gunpowder was loaded into the belly of the pot, followed by a heavy arrow or a crude stone ball. To fire it, a soldier would touch a hot iron to a small touch hole, igniting the powder in a violent burst of expanding gas that hurled the projectile forward. It was a fundamental shift in the very source of a weapon's power. For centuries, the energy had been kinetic, drawn from human muscle, twisted ropes, or the pull of gravity. Now it was chemical. The power was locked inside a mysterious black powder, waiting for a single spark to set it free. These first guns were as dangerous to their users as they were to the enemy. The iron used to cast them was often brittle and flawed, leading to catastrophic failures that could maim or claim the lives of the gunners themselves. The loading process was painstakingly slow, and their accuracy was practically non-existent. A cannonball might fly straight, or it might wobble off in a wild, unpredictable arc. Yet for all their flaws, the psychological impact was absolute. The thunderous roar of a cannon was unlike any sound heard before on a battlefield, a man-made crack of lightning that could be felt deep in the chest. When an iron shot did strike a stone wall, it did not just chip away at it like a trebuchet stone. It struck with a concentrated, piercing force that could pulverize the masonry on impact. This was not a slow grinding away of defenses, but a sudden, violent breach. The age of black powder had begun, not with a whisper, but with a world-shattering bang, and it promised to rewrite the rules of conflict all over again. That sharp, concussive crack soon gave way to a deeper, more sustained roar. The cannon was no longer a sideshow. It was becoming the main event, a brutal learning process written in fire and iron. The first true Bombards were monstrous creations, so immense they were often cast on sight because moving them was nearly impossible. They were forged from iron staves, held together with heavy hoops like a colossal barrel, a design that held inherent weakness. A miscalculated powder charge or a hidden flaw in the metal could turn the engine into a deadly fragmentation bomb for its own crew. Yet commanders willingly accepted this risk. The reward was unprecedented. Where a trebuchet might take weeks to collapse a single section of wall through repeated impacts, a well-aimed bombard could achieve the same result in a matter of days or even hours. Its stone shot struck with a concentrated, smashing force that could pulverize masonry, sending lethal shards of stone flying inward. This was not a slow erosion, it was a sudden and violent deletion of a defensive line. The very value of these terrifying weapons accelerated their evolution. Artisans moved from wrought iron to casting entire guns from bronze, a metal that was less brittle and could absorb the immense stresses of gunpowder far more reliably. This technological leap made cannons safer, but more importantly, it made them smaller and more mobile. The gun was breaking free from the siege camp. The Battle of Crécy in 1346 presents a fascinating, though debated, moment in this story. Historical accounts suggest the English army may have deployed a small number of iron cannon, their reports startling the French cavalry. Whether their effect was decisive or merely psychological is less important than the signal it sent. The cannon was no longer confined to pounding static walls. It was now marching with the army, a portable source of thunder that could be brought to bear on any battlefield. This new mobility forced a complete rethinking of everything. Supply trains now had to carry not just arrows and food, but tons of iron shot and barrels of volatile black powder. Tactics had to adapt to the gun's terrifying reach and its ability to shatter a knight's charge before it even began. And back in the drawing rooms of architects, the thick, rounded walls that had defied the trebuchet were suddenly looking vulnerable again. The existence of the cannon signaled the beginning of the end for the castle as the ultimate symbol of power, proving that no fortification could ever be truly permanent again. The true power of a weapon was not forged on the battlefield, but in the workshop. Behind every thunderous blast of a cannon and every groaning launch of a trebuchet lay a quiet revolution in materials, a hidden war fought by blacksmiths, carpenters, and alchemists. The most brilliant engineering design was useless if the materials failed under the immense stress. Consider the evolution of the cannon barrel. The earliest Bombards, built from wrought iron staves bound by hoops, were terrifyingly fragile. A single flaw in the metal or an overzealous powder charge could turn the weapon into a deadly fragmentation grenade for its own crew. The solution was a leap in metallurgy, a shift from wrought iron to cast bronze. A bronze cannon was a single, seamless piece of metal, far less brittle and capable of containing the violent, high-pressure explosion of gunpowder with much greater reliability. This was not merely an improvement, it was a transformation. It made cannons safer to operate, yes, but more importantly, it allowed them to be cast with thinner, stronger walls. This new strength made cannons smaller, more mobile, and far more powerful, fundamentally changing their role in war. The same meticulous care was applied to the construction of the mighty Trebuchet. Its power depended entirely on the integrity of its wooden frame. A master carpenter would select timbers with an artist's eye, searching for wood with a tight, straight grain and a specific density. The wood had to be properly seasoned, dried slowly over years to prevent warping or cracking under the colossal strain of the swinging counterweight. A single flawed beam could spell disaster, causing the entire machine to shudder itself to pieces upon its first launch. This was a science of organic materials, where understanding the life of a tree was as crucial as understanding the principles of leverage. And then there was the powder itself. The earliest gunpowder, known as serpentine, was a simple, dusty mixture that was notoriously unreliable. Its ingredients, saltpeter, charcoal, and sulfur, would often separate during transport, leaving a weak and unpredictable charge. The breakthrough came with corn powder. This process involved mixing the ingredients into a wet paste, which was then forced through a sieve and dried into tiny, hard grains. This created pockets of air between the granules, allowing the powder to burn much more evenly and with vastly greater force. Producing consistent, high-quality corn powder was a complex feat of chemical engineering, one that required precise measurements and controlled conditions. The unsung artisans in the forges and the mills were the true architects of this new age of warfare. Their quiet, painstaking work in selecting the right wood, casting the perfect bronze, and mixing the most potent powder provided the essential foundation. Without their hidden genius, the great engines of war would have remained nothing more than impressive and very dangerous drawings on a page. The cost of a single trebuchet could bankrupt a minor lord. This new warfare was not just a clash of armies, it was a financial black hole, and it fundamentally reshaped the balance of power in medieval Europe. The old feudal system, built on a lord's obligation to provide knights for 40 days of service, was completely inadequate for a siege that might last for years. A campaign now required a permanent, paid workforce. It needed master engineers to design the engines, skilled carpenters to build them, blacksmiths to forge the metal components, and sappers to tunnel under the walls. This was not a temporary call to arms, it was a standing industrial enterprise, and its fuel was silver. Only the wealthiest entities, kings and powerful city-states, could possibly afford the astronomical cost. This financial reality began to pull military power away from the local nobility and concentrate it firmly in the hands of centralized monarchies. The king's treasury was becoming the true heart of the army. This shift created a new kind of elite, the military engineer. These men were not nobles by birth, but their specialized knowledge made them indispensable. A master of engines who could calculate trajectories and stress points was worth more than a dozen knights in shining armor. Their skills were so rare and so critical to victory that they could negotiate for immense salaries, land grants, and a status that blurred the rigid lines of the old social order. The battlefield was no longer the exclusive domain of the aristocracy. It was now a place where a commoner with a brilliant mind for geometry or chemistry could rise to prominence and power. This professionalization of war accelerated the decline of the feudal knight. The romantic ideal of a chivalrous champion was being eclipsed by the grim efficiency of the cannon crew and the sapper. Monarchs began to rely less on the unreliable service of their vassals and more on paid professional soldiers and mercenary companies who could operate the complex new weapons. Warfare was transforming from a seasonal duty of the landed class into a year-round profession dominated by technicians, logisticians, and accountants. The ability to wage war was now measured not in the number of loyal knights, but in the depth of the treasury and the quality of the experts on the payroll. The true revolution was not just in the weapons themselves, but in the profound social and economic upheaval they triggered, an upheaval that would ultimately forge the modern state. The sound of war was now something a single person could carry. This was the promise of the Arquebus, a long, heavy hand cannon that brought the age of black powder down to the level of the individual soldier. It was an awkward, even clumsy weapon. Loading it was a slow, multi-step ritual that required pouring powder, ramming a lead ball down the barrel, and then carefully priming the flashpan, all while trying to keep a smoldering match cord from accidentally setting the whole process off prematurely. Its accuracy was notoriously poor, effective only at very close ranges and against a large, slow-moving target like a massed cavalry charge. Yet for all its flaws, the Arquebus was revolutionary because it fundamentally altered the equation of personal combat. For centuries, the ability to defeat a knight in his full-plate armor required immense skill, years of training, and either another knight of equal standing or a very lucky strike with a polearm. The Arquebus changed that reality in an instant. A conscripted farmer with a few weeks of training could now level his weapon, pull the trigger, and send a lead ball that could punch through the finest steel armor at 100 paces. The battlefield was no longer a stage for aristocratic heroes, but a deadly leveler where birthright meant nothing against a cloud of sulphurous smoke and a hail of lead. The psychological shock of this new reality was devastating. A knight charging across a field was accustomed to arrows glancing off his armor, a familiar and manageable risk. But the sudden, deafening crack of a volley of arquebus fire, followed by the sight of his comrades falling for no apparent reason, shattered the very foundation of cavalry tactics. The horse, a creature of nerve and instinct, would often panic at the noise and the smell, turning a disciplined charge into a chaotic scramble. This new threat demanded a new formation, the infantry square. These blocks of soldiers combined the defensive power of long pikes, which held charging horsemen at bay, with the offensive punch of ranks of arquebusiers. These gunners would fire in rotating volleys, creating a near-constant barrage of shot that could shred an attacking force before it ever made contact. The individual soldier was no longer a lone warrior, but a single, interchangeable component in a larger, gunpowder-fueled machine. His value lay not in his personal prowess, but in his ability to stand in line, follow commands, and reload. The age of the common man had arrived on the battlefield, and the echo of the arquebus shot was the sound of the old world crumbling. The fortress had to learn to swallow a cannonball. This was the brutal new reality of the Trace Italienne, a geometric revolution in stone and earth that turned defensive architecture inside out. Gone were the proud, soaring towers that offered a perfect target. In their place, engineers designed sprawling, low-slung complexes that seemed to hug the ground. Their most critical innovation was the use of earth. Massive ramparts were constructed by piling tons of soil and rubble behind retaining walls of brick or stone. When a cannonball struck, it did not shatter solid masonry. It buried itself harmlessly into this dense, yielding mass, its energy dissipated in a cloud of dirt. The fortress became a shock absorber, but the true genius of this new design lay in its geometry, specifically the angular bastion. These were arrowhead-shaped projections that extended out from the corners of the walls. From a bird's-eye view, a fully developed star fort resembled a complex snowflake or a many-pointed star, hence its name. Each bastion was positioned to protect its neighbor. The key was eliminating blind spots. In a medieval castle, attackers could crowd right up against the base of a wall, safe from the defender's arrows. The bastion solved this with overlapping fields of fire. Defenders stationed on one bastion could fire their guns along the face of the adjacent wall, sweeping the entire area clean of any enemy soldiers who dared to approach. The fortress was no longer a passive wall to be scaled or broken. It had become an active, interactive weapon. An attacking army now faced a deadly geometric puzzle. To approach the walls, they had to cross wide, open killing zones raked by fire from multiple angles. Often, these zones were preceded by deep, water-filled moats that made tunneling impossible and assault treacherous. Every element of the design, from the angle of the bastion's point to the slope of the earthen rampart, was a calculated response to the physics of gunpowder warfare. The castle had evolved from a symbol of noble power into a sophisticated machine for defense, a testament to the fact that the only way to survive a revolution in attack was to launch an even more brilliant revolution in defense. A single blueprint could now command more power than an entire regiment of knights. The military engineer was no longer a backstage craftsman. He was the new strategic mastermind of the battlefield. Men like Francesco di Giorgio Martini of Italy and Simon Stevin of the Netherlands became intellectual forces, their influence stretching far beyond the construction site. They were theorists who authored dense, illustrated treatises that codified the entire science of war. These volumes covered everything from the ideal angle for a bastion to the mechanics of lifting immense weights, transforming scattered tricks of the trade into a unified, teachable body of knowledge. To succeed, an engineer had to be a polymath. He needed advanced mathematics to calculate the arc of a cannonball or the load a wall could bear. He wielded geometry like a weapon, using it to design fortress layouts that were both lethal and resilient. He had to grasp the physics of force, pressure, and leverage, whether he was diverting a river to flood a moat or determining the precise counterweight for a trebuchet. This rare combination of skills made these individuals so indispensable that their loyalty became a commodity. They were international consultants in an age of constant conflict, offering their expertise to the highest bidder, whether it was a French king, a Venetian doge, or an Ottoman sultan. An engineer might design a state-of-the-art fortress for one power 1 year, and then use that very knowledge to devise its downfall for a rival the next. This created a strange, fluid marketplace of military intellect, where the plans for the latest defensive innovation could cross enemy lines in the mind of a single man. The engineer's mind had become the ultimate strategic asset, a portable, powerful weapon that could determine the fate of cities and the futures of empires without its owner ever needing to draw a sword. The sound of artillery was no longer anchored to the land. It had learned to sail, transforming the vast oceans into a new, fluid battlefield where the rules of engagement were being rewritten with every cannon's roar. For centuries, naval warfare had been an extension of combat on land, focused on closing the distance to ram an enemy vessel or grapple it for a bloody boarding action where soldiers fought deck to deck. The ship itself was little more than a floating platform for infantry. This all changed when engineers first wrestled the weight and recoil of a cannon onto a ship's deck. The earliest attempts were clumsy, with guns lashed to the forecastle and sterncastle, their limited fields of fire and tremendous kick making them as hazardous to the ship's stability as they were to the enemy. The true breakthrough was structural, a simple hole cut low in the ship's side. The invention of the gunport, a reinforced opening with a hinged lid that could be sealed against the waves, was as revolutionary for naval warfare as the rounded tower had been for the castle. It allowed heavy cannons to be mounted low in the hull, where their weight actually improved the vessel's stability. Now, a ship's primary weaponry was no longer pointing forward, but to the side, concentrated into a single, devastating broadside. A captain's goal shifted from getting close to an enemy to positioning his ship at the perfect angle to unleash the full weight of his iron shot in one shattering volley. This new reality demanded a new kind of warship, one built from the keel up as a mobile artillery battery. The Galleon emerged as the master of this new age. Its design was a direct response to the cannon. The tall, castle-like structures at the front and back, which had once given archers a commanding height, were dramatically cut down. This created a lower, sleeker profile that was less vulnerable to tipping over in high winds, a critical feature when your main armament was dozens of heavy iron guns. The Galleon's long, relatively narrow hull was built for speed and agility, allowing a skilled captain to maneuver his vessel to deliver a broadside while presenting a smaller target to his opponent. A naval battle was no longer a chaotic melee of individual heroism. It became a highly disciplined ballet of gunnery and seamanship, a contest decided by which crew could load and fire their cannons faster, and which captain could outmaneuver the other to cross his T, positioning his ship to rake the enemy's deck from bow to stern with a hail of shot. The value of a ship was no longer measured by how many soldiers it could carry, but by the number of guns it mounted and the skill of the men who served them. Control of the sea lanes, the vital arteries of trade and empire, now belonged to whoever could master this complex new science of floating firepower. A king's ambition was often measured in wagon loads of grain. The most brilliant trebuchet design was worthless if the army that built it starved before the first stone was launched. A siege was not a swift strike. It was a sustained industrial operation that consumed resources at a staggering rate. Just feeding the thousands of soldiers and laborers required a constant river of supplies flowing into the camp. Each horse needed over 20 pounds of fodder every single day, and a single siege might require hundreds of these animals for transport and cavalry. But the true logistical nightmare was supplying the siege engines themselves. To build a single large trebuchet, an army might need to fell every suitable tree in a vast area, requiring teams of woodcutters and carters to transport the massive timbers over treacherous roads. Ropes woven from tons of hemp had to be strong enough to withstand the incredible strain of the counterweight. The iron for nails, fittings, and saws had to be smelted, forged, and delivered. And then there was the ammunition. A single day of bombardment could consume dozens of stone balls, each one carefully shaped by masons to be as spherical as possible for accuracy and range. These were not just rocks picked up from a riverbed, they were precision-made projectiles, and their production was an industry in itself. The supply line was the siege's vulnerable artery, a long, winding trail of carts and pack animals stretching back to friendly territory, constantly threatened by bad weather, rough terrain, and enemy raiders. A commander's greatest fear was not a sally from the castle gates, but the news that a supply convoy had been ambushed and destroyed. The real hero of a long siege was often the quartermaster, the man who managed this impossibly complex web of procurement and distribution. His ledgers, filled with lists of nails, barrels of salted fish, and cords of firewood, were as powerful a weapon as any sword. victory did not always go to the bravest army, but to the one that could best feed the insatiable beast of war. The ground beneath a soldier's feet could become his greatest enemy, while the sky filled with the roar of trebuchets and cannons, a hidden, desperate struggle unfolded in absolute darkness. This was the war of the mine and the countermine, a claustrophobic battle fought with pickaxes and fire deep below the earth. Attackers, known as sappers, would begin digging a tunnel from their own lines toward the castle's foundation. Their work was a race against time and collapse. They had to be part geologist, judging the stability of the soil and rock, and part carpenter, carefully shoring up their narrow passage with wooden timbers to prevent a cave-in. The air was thick with dust and the smell of damp earth, the only light coming from flickering lamps that cast long, dancing shadows on the tunnel walls. The final act of a successful mine was a terrifyingly precise operation. Once directly beneath a critical section of the wall, the sappers would hollow out a large chamber, pack it with flammable material, and set a colossal fire. The goal was not to burn the stone, but to burn away the wooden supports holding up the tunnel roof. As those timbers turned to ash, the ceiling would collapse, and with nothing left to support it, the massive weight of the wall above would crumble into the void, creating a deadly, sloping breach for the army to storm. But defenders were not passive observers, listening for the faint, telltale sounds of digging from within the castle. They would launch their own desperate response, the countermine. Teams of defenders would begin digging their own tunnels, not to collapse a wall, but to intercept the attacker's passage. When these two tunnels met, the result was a nightmare. The wider war above ground vanished, replaced by a brutal, close-quarters fight in a space no wider than a man's shoulders. In pitch blackness, broken only by the sudden flare of a torch, soldiers fought with short swords, axes, and knives in a frantic, suffocating struggle where there was no room to swing a weapon and no chance of retreat. Victory in these underground clashes was often more decisive than any cannonade. A single successful mine could bring down a fortress's defenses in a matter of hours, rendering months of costly bombardment pointless. It was a grim, subterranean chess match where the stakes were the very ground the castle stood on, and the players were men willing to wage war in a tomb of their own making. A single piece of wood could now decide the fate of a nation. While the thunder of great engines dominated the siege, a quieter revolution was unfolding in the hands of the common soldier, a transformation of personal firepower that would humble the most noble knight. The English longbow was not merely a weapon, it was a triumph of organic engineering. Its power came from the meticulous selection and shaping of a single stave of yew wood. The bowyer would use the natural properties of the tree itself, crafting the bow so the resilient heartwood formed the belly, able to withstand immense compression, while the flexible sapwood formed the back, storing and releasing energy like a spring. This living material, shaped by human skill, could launch a heavy arrow with enough force to punch through chainmail and even pierce the plate armor of a knight at a considerable distance. Its true battlefield advantage, however, was its devastating speed. A skilled longbowman could loose 10 or 12 arrows in a single minute, creating a veritable storm of wood and iron that could darken the sky and shred an enemy advance before it even began. This relentless hail of arrows demanded a response, and it arrived in the form of the crossbow. Where the longbow was a testament to natural materials and human strength, the crossbow was a machine of mechanical advantage. Its short, incredibly powerful limbs were often a composite of wood, animal horn, and sinew, all laminated together to create a spring of astounding tension. The real engineering genius, however, lay in the spanning mechanisms. A soldier could not simply draw this weapon by hand. He needed tools. The windlass, a system of pulleys and cranks, or the cranequin, a rack and pinion gear, allowed a man to slowly and methodically ratchet the string back, locking it into place. This process was slow, perhaps a single shot for every 5 or 6 from a longbow, but the trade-off was immense concentrated power and minimal training. A crossbowman did not need the years of practice and developed muscles of a longbowman. He just needed the strength to operate the crank. The crossbow leveled the playing field, turning a peasant into a soldier who could, with a single pull of a trigger, defeat a warrior who had trained his entire life. The psychological impact of these weapons was profound. For a knight encased in steel, the battlefield had suddenly become a much more dangerous place. The familiar, manageable risk of a sword fight was replaced by the terrifying, impersonal threat of a projectile that could arrive from 100 yards away with no warning. This new reality forced a rapid evolution in personal armor. Smiths began to move away from chainmail, which could be penetrated by a bodkin point arrow, and toward full plate armor. This was not just thicker metal, it was a new science of deflection. Armorers learned to shape the steel with graceful, glancing curves, designed to make an arrow or crossbow bolt skid off harmlessly rather than strike head-on. A knight's suit became a personal fortress, a mobile, articulated shell that was the direct result of engineering pressures from the battlefield below. Yet even this was not a perfect solution, as the sheer kinetic force of a hit could still cause serious injury, and the weight of the armor made a dismounted knight vulnerable to more mobile, lightly armed soldiers. The age of the aristocratic champion was being systematically dismantled, not by a rival noble, but by the engineered power held in the hands of the common man. The arrow and the bolt had become the great equalizers, and their whisper in flight was the sound of a new social order being born on the wind. Yet the medieval mind did not invent its tools from nothing. The great engines of war were built upon a foundation laid centuries earlier by Roman engineers, whose monumental achievements cast a long shadow across the Middle Ages. For a time, much of this classical knowledge was fragmented or lost in Western Europe, preserved instead in the great libraries of the Byzantine and Islamic worlds. Its slow return through translation and trade was like a sudden infusion of light. The rediscovery of texts like Vitruvius's De Architectura provided a complete education in stone and mechanics. Here were the Roman principles of the arch, the science of hydraulics for aqueducts, and the precise geometry for building roads that could last 1,000 years. This was not just a set of instructions, it was a way of thinking, a systematic approach to solving problems of weight, force, and stability that medieval builders eagerly adopted. You can see this legacy in the thick, enduring walls of Norman keeps, which echoed Roman solidity, and in the network of roads that still connected a fractured continent, allowing armies and their new siege trains to move. But medieval engineers were far more than just copyists. They took this classical inheritance and made it their own, adapting it to face challenges the Romans never envisioned. Consider the Roman onager, a formidable torsion-powered catapult. It was a powerful machine, but its design had limits. Medieval thinkers looked at the same problem of hurling a stone and arrived at a different, more powerful solution by embracing the lever and counterweight, creating the trebuchet. This was not an improvement, it was a reinvention. It demonstrated a crucial truth. The past provided the essential springboard, the fundamental language of engineering, but it was the medieval mind that wrote a new and more devastating chapter. This dynamic dialogue between rediscovered wisdom and bold innovation became the true engine of progress, proving that the greatest advancements are often a conversation across the centuries. A king's power was measured not just in land, but in the timber and iron he could command. The great siege engines that dominated a battlefield were far more than weapons. they were colossal, moving monuments to the authority of the ruler who deployed them. A machine like the English trebuchet known as the Warwolf was a statement carved from entire forests. Its very name was a weapon, chosen to sow fear long before its first stone ever took flight. This was psychological warfare on a grand scale, a form of propaganda that communicated directly with both the enemy on the walls and the soldiers in the camp. For the defenders, the name promised a beast of relentless, savage power. For the attackers, it fostered a sense of invincibility, a belief that they served a master whose ingenuity could tame the very elements of wood and stone. The construction site of such an engine was itself a theater of power. The sheer logistics involved were a public demonstration of a kingdom's reach. It required the coordinated labor of hundreds of specialized workers, from the carpenters and blacksmiths to the carters hauling immense ropes and stones. The ability to fund and supply such an operation for months on end was a clear signal of immense economic strength and administrative skill. A monarch who could build a warwolf was telling the world that his treasury was deep, his organization was flawless, and his will was absolute. In the art and chronicles of the time, these machines were often depicted not as mere tools, but as marvels of human achievement. They stood as symbols of intellect triumphing over brute force, of a new age where the scholar's mind could achieve what the warrior's arm could not. They were the cathedrals of conflict, reflecting a society increasingly fascinated with mechanics and the application of knowledge. A siege engine was ultimately a dual symbol. It was a promise of destruction to its enemies and a celebration of the creative, ambitious spirit that built it. The medieval engineering revolution was never a European solo performance, but a grand, global symphony. While European knights were adapting to the crossbow, a world away, Chinese alchemists were perfecting a discovery that would change everything: gunpowder. This was not a secret kept for centuries, it traveled. The sprawling trade networks of the Silk Road and the relentless expansion of the Mongol Empire acted as a vast information superhighway, carrying technological blueprints and battlefield reports across continents. When Mongol armies laid siege to cities, they employed a terrifying array of imported Chinese experts and their advanced siege engines, including early rockets and explosive devices. European observers witnessed this new form of warfare, a shocking blend of traditional cavalry and devastating chemical firepower, and the lessons were not lost on them. The knowledge of this volatile black powder seeped into Europe, where it sparked its own frantic period of experimentation and adaptation. This global exchange was not a one-way street. While gunpowder traveled west, the principles of the counterweight trebuchet, so highly developed in Europe, found their way eastward, influencing siegecraft in the Middle East and beyond. In the Islamic world, engineers were building their own powerful hybrid machines, combining traction and counterweight principles to create formidable engines. In India, rulers were developing sophisticated rocket artillery that would evolve for centuries. These were not copies, but parallel innovations, different cultures arriving at similar solutions to the universal problem of breaking down a wall. To see these developments in isolation is to miss the true story. The medieval world was a surprisingly connected place, where an idea born in a Chinese workshop could, over generations, help topple a castle in France, and where a European engine design could influence a siege in the Levant. The real transformation of warfare was driven by this relentless, borderless conversation of minds. A castle was no longer a family's private fortress, but a glaring liability. The very symbol of a noble's independence was now a target, and the monarch held the gunpowder to prove it. This led to a deliberate policy of destruction known as slighting. When a rebellious baron was finally subdued, the king's engineers would not just occupy his castle, they would methodically dismantle it. Using the same cannons that had rendered its walls obsolete, they would blast down towers and breach curtain walls, not for conquest, but to ensure it could never again be used as a base for defiance. This was power speaking in the language of rubble. The ruined castle left standing, or more accurately, crumbling, served as a permanent, stark lesson to anyone else who might challenge the crown. The financial burden of maintaining these stone giants became another nail in their coffin. Why pour a fortune into a structure that gunpowder could defeat in a week? The new bastion forts, those low, sprawling, star-shaped complexes, were projects of an entirely different scale. Their construction required resources so vast that only the royal treasury could possibly fund them. This shift in funding cemented a parallel shift in control. Military architecture was no longer the hobby of a local lord, but a strategic investment of the state. The fortified homes of the aristocracy gradually vanished from the hills, and in their place rose royal citadels garrisoned by royal troops and loyal to a single central authority. The landscape itself was being redrawn, the silhouette of private power giving way to the unmistakable geometry of the king. The cinematic spectacle of a castle wall exploding in a shower of debris makes for thrilling drama, but the reality of these war machines was far more intricate and far less predictable. Consider the legendary Warwolf, a name that evokes a beast of pure destruction. In truth, it was a masterpiece of applied physics, a delicate balance of weight and leverage where a miscalculation by a single degree in the release angle could send its expensive stone ammunition plunging into the moat instead of soaring over the wall. Its operators were not mere laborers, they were technicians who understood the complex relationship between the counterweight's mass, the length of the throwing arm, and the precise moment the sling would whip free. This was not unguided brute force, it was a carefully choreographed performance where every variable had to be perfectly tuned. The popular image of these engines hurling the remains of plague victims is a grim and persistent myth. While such a horrific act was theoretically within their capability, historical evidence for its widespread use is scarce. The primary objective of a siege engine was structural collapse, not biological terror. A 200-pound stone block smashing into a gatehouse did immediate, tangible damage, while the effectiveness of spreading illness was uncertain, slow, and logistically challenging. The real terror was the relentless, grinding demolition of the walls that kept people safe. This gap between myth and reality is even wider when we look at the earliest cannons. They were not the reliable artillery pieces of later centuries, but volatile iron vessels that could just as easily kill the men who fired them. The quality of early gunpowder was inconsistent, and the strength of the metal was often flawed. A sudden weak spot in the barrel could turn the entire cannon into a deadly fragmentation bomb, claiming the lives of its own crew in an instant. The loading process was a painstaking ritual that could take several minutes for a single shot, a glacial pace that required the gunners to be protected by their own infantry during the vulnerable reloading period. Understanding these limitations does not diminish the achievements of medieval engineers. It elevates them. They were not wielding magic wands of instant destruction, but pioneering dangerous, imperfect technologies. They triumphed not in spite of the complexity and risk, but by mastering it through calculation, iteration, and a profound courage to stand next to a machine that could, at any moment, turn against them. The true shadow of these engineering marvels fell across the thousands of nameless hands that brought them to life. For every master engineer sketching a design, there was an army of laborers, carpenters, and blacksmiths translating that vision into wood and iron under conditions of immense hardship. The construction of a single massive trebuchet was a feat of human endurance. Conscripted peasants and prisoners of war would spend weeks felling ancient trees, hauling colossal timbers, and wrestling heavy stones into place for the counterweight, their work a relentless cycle of strain and exhaustion. The air was thick with the sounds of their labor, the rhythmic strike of hammers and the constant rasp of saws, all performed under the watchful eyes of overseers and the ever-present threat of enemy sorties from the castle walls. These workers were the true engine of the siege, their collective effort powering the machine long before its counterweight ever dropped. That danger only intensified for the men who operated the finished weapons. A trebuchet crew worked in a precarious dance with physics, knowing that a frayed rope or a cracked beam could send tons of wood and stone shuddering violently apart. For the early cannon gunners, the peril was even more intimate. They stood beside barrels of unpredictable serpentine powder, a dusty mixture that could separate or ignite unevenly. A flawed casting in the iron of their bombard could turn it into a deadly fragmentation grenade, claiming its crew in a sudden, fiery instant. Theirs was a profession measured in split seconds and trusted calculations, where a single error in measurement or a moment of distraction could be the last. And within the besieged town, the human cost was measured in quiet desperation. The thunderous impacts of stone against masonry were not just attacks on walls, but a sustained assault on the spirit. Civilians and soldiers alike endured the psychological torment of that relentless pounding, never knowing where the next blow would fall. As the siege dragged on, food supplies dwindled to nothing, reducing diets to boiled leather and whatever vermin could be caught. The crowded, unsanitary conditions behind the walls became a breeding ground for illness, while the constant fear of a final, bloody assault once the walls were breached hung over every day. This narrative is not one of faceless statistics, but of profound human resilience. The real story of medieval military engineering is a dual legacy, a testament to the soaring heights of human ingenuity built upon a foundation of immense human endurance and sacrifice. The medieval workshop was the true cradle of the modern world. Those centuries of relentless innovation did not vanish with the age of knights and castles. Instead, they crystallized into the fundamental principles that guide warfare and technology to this day. The professional military engineer, once a rare and prized consultant, became the intellectual backbone of the state, his role formalized into the great military academies of the 18th and 19th centuries. These institutions were built on the very idea that warfare was a science, a direct legacy of the medieval masters who first applied geometry and physics to the art of conflict. The evolution of the fortress itself charts this unbroken line. The medieval shift from tall, thin walls to low, thick ramparts in response to the trebuchet, and then the geometric complexity of the star fort to counter the cannon, established a pattern of adaptive defense. This same logic of deflection and absorption governs the design of modern bunkers and defensive positions, where concrete and earth are used to dissipate energy, just as medieval builders used rubble and soil behind their stone facades. Perhaps the most enduring lesson was the undeniable value of technological supremacy. The army that fielded the better trebuchet or the more reliable cannon often held the key to victory, a truth that planted itself firmly in military doctrine. This conviction that a breakthrough in engineering could decide the fate of nations fueled an endless arms race. It is the same driving force that led to the development of the tank, the precision artillery shell, and the stealth bomber. The relentless pursuit of a better way to breach a wall, first undertaken with levers and counterweights, never truly ended. It simply evolved. The echo of the blacksmith's hammer shaping a cannon barrel is still heard in the quiet hum of a computer designing the next generation of armor, a timeless reminder that the battle between the shield and the spear is forever rewritten by the ingenuity of the human mind. The calculated swing of a trebuchet's arm and the earth-shattering blast of the first cannon did far more than transform warfare. These were the catalysts that reshaped societies, redefined power, and set humanity on a new technological trajectory. We have witnessed the endless cycle of innovation, a relentless dialogue where each new defense was met with a more brilliant attack, and where the minds of engineers ultimately eclipsed the strength of knights. The very landscape of power was rewritten in stone and smoke, a testament to an era where human ingenuity pushed relentlessly against the boundaries of the possible. These machines were not merely instruments of conflict, but profound manifestations of a creative spirit, solving ancient problems with new and terrifying tools. As you look at the world around you, consider how this legacy lives on. It is present in the principles of problem-solving that drive modern technology, in the constant race between new systems and the measures designed to stop them. The medieval workshop, with its blend of practical skill and theoretical genius, established a pattern of innovation that continues to this very day. If you found this journey through the engine of history compelling, we invite you to subscribe for more deep dives into the forces that shaped our world. And we would love to hear your thoughts. Which medieval innovation do you believe was the most transformative in the